Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Motivation and That. I'm Natalie, your host, and I'm going to admit this is my fifth take. I was not well organized this week. It was a week. I don't know if anyone else had a week, but it was kind of like everything that could just compound on itself compounded on itself. And I got to today and I was like, wow, I don't have an episode. I made it 4 episodes and I've stayed really organized and I have a really good plan for moving forward for getting a lot more done. We've got outlines out, proposals out, scheduling people to come on. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess this week will be a solo episode. And I'd been thinking about topics to cover and I just wasn't sure. It was kind of like in the come down from all of the chaos and starting to really, I think, wonder and stress about certain things. I was like, what do I even talk about? Like, where do I even go with this that it sets it up for the future and also make sure to honor what I want this podcast to be? So it's great. I'm having kind of the midlife crisis early on, only on episode 5, and hopefully fifth take and fifth episode will all make a lot of sense, and we'll at least be able to get into something today that hopefully will set some cornerstones up for future conversations, which, by the way, are going to be things like talking about respect and authenticity and feeling confident even when you're still trying to figure out who you are, dealing with grief, understanding the impact of death and loss on us as we're developing, and a whole host of other things. So, do know that is coming. It won't just be me talking with my blue mosaic wall behind me if you're watching on YouTube or just listening to my voice on any of the other streaming services. And to be quite honest, it makes me nervous. Like, I get a little anxious. I'm like, who's going to want to just listen to me talk the whole time? So we're going to do a little bit of kind of off the cuff things that I think really came up for me over the course of the week that I have been forced in the moment to reflect on and look at, and things that have really stood out to me and started to rise to the surface. And today, while I was in a conversation with Josh, and we've had a bunch of them this week. I don't know, like I said, I don't know what's in the atmosphere, but really just trying to untangle and unwind a lot of the tricky web of trauma that has reared its ugly head with me recently. And it just kept coming up to me, this feeling of time and feeling like time was going to get away from me and I didn't have time and I just wanted to have enough time, and thinking back on things and kind of this reflection of, well, so long ago, why is it still feeling so fresh? And so I'm going to share a few anecdotes today. Not antidotes. I wish we had antidotes for trauma. That would be really nice, right? But anecdotes about some of the experiences that I think have really kind of anchored themselves in my kind of recent fears and recent traumas, and why gaslighting has been so hard for me, or watching other people go through their, being told one thing and it's obviously an action of another type that's being seen, managing feeling like people aren't being truthful or honest, and being worried about what you say and that you can't take it back. So a lot of this kind of circulates around when my dad was starting to get sick and going forward into through his death. And I will always say that ages kind of 15 to 18 for me were the most impactful ages that I can imagine in my life. Even looking back on when I moved out on my own and going through college and relationships, it's still those 3 years that are just the fixation of where I feel like I get stuck. And so not only are they developmental from a chemical biology standpoint, but developmental that was kind of sandwiched into that time, loss and grief, and just feeling abandoned a lot, and feeling like you couldn't trust anyone. And I will preface this with, you are not going to hear me use my dad's second wife's name. I am very conscious to anything that can be internalized as negative speak. And in a protection of myself, please know that these are my perceptions, as we've talked about a lot. My perceptions of what happened, they're my experiences. People listening who know things, just keep that in mind. But it was a wild time to feel like you were on your own as a teenager and trying to get people to want to have you around. And I say that because my mom was having a mental breakdown. My dad was in this new relationship. He was head over heels in love. Like, that was the one thing that he wanted to spend his time focusing on. And then he gets sick on top of it. And I'm just out there floating around. You know, it's that idea of I was a good kid. I didn't cause trouble necessarily. I wasn't getting arrested. I was still performing in school. I was still involved in extracurricular activities. So I kind of just like was in this weird floaty area. And it was funny because later on, my friends would tell me their parents thought I was the bad influence. And I was like, really? I had no idea. But I can see how that was. And it was weird because I also think that it was this component of, well, Natalie, you know, the one with the crazy mom, and the dad who's kind of out of the picture. It was like they understood why I was that way, but also still didn't want necessarily me influencing their kids. But I still think it's really funny because I was probably one of the more well-behaved teenagers despite all of that going on. But it's that loneliness component. And I believe when you are lonely, time slows down and things become so rooted in your memory and in your person during that, because there are so many less distractions. And it really is being with you, yourself, and I kind of thing, me, myself, and I. And that was probably the loneliest time in my life, were those kind of few years there, because it felt like everyone else was too busy. And so I was reverting back into who I was as a kid of, you know, keep the peace, do your thing. If you push too far, they'll let you know. And I'll be honest, it was kind of hard to push too far when everyone else is really distracted. And then to watch kind of what was happening and then see myself repeating some of that history. So let me get into it. I'll talk a little bit about the anecdotes, and then we'll kind of set up for where I'm hoping some of these conversations go for in the future. But when I think one of the first ones, right at that kind of age 15, I had been on a field trip. My dad had met his what would be second wife. And I remembered calling home to my mom, who at that point was really struggling. And she sounded just so off and so weird. And I said, is someone coming over to hang out with you? Because it was an overnighter to Harrisburg. And I think a friend ended up going over to see her and spend some time with her. And when we got back the next day, her best friend was there waiting to pick me up at the school. And I'm like, where's mom? Mm-hmm. $1 million question. And she was in the hospital. And not only was she in the hospital, she was in my dad's hospital. My dad was a hospital CEO. And so she was there under, I guess, a psychiatric stay. It was weird because she didn't end up 302'd, which in Pennsylvania is, you know, the involuntary commitment. But it just whole array of things. And I ended up having to go to the hospital. And I remember my dad being so mad. I think he even came down to the ER and was like, how dare you? Like, it was like this first big kind of explosion between the two of them. And after that, I don't really remember them being in the same room all that often ever again. I would get rides to go to my dad's, or, you know, eventually would have my own license. And so it really was, I think, the start of the end in a lot of ways of what was kind of a manageable situation, and then moving into this, having to start parsing yourself out in pieces to appease or to support kind of the different people. And the anger that he had, and he didn't get angry often, that he had at my mom about that would stick with me and be reflected a little later on when I would kind of end up in another weird situation and pull that incident to the forefront of my mind. But here I am. I'm trying to get my mom home and relaxed. I'm 15. I know I got to go back to school. My dad is so mad at my mom. I don't even think we were really talking much at that point. And it felt like the only one holding it together was me. And here I am getting a job and I'm trying to bring in, a little bit of money so no one has to worry about paying for me for anything. And again, not like I ever had to worry about it, but it felt like I needed to do that. It felt like I needed to just grow up in that instance. And a few years or a few months after that, my dad started to have signs and symptoms of being sick. And I was told he just had a kidney infection. And I will say this, and this is one message for anyone out there that has kids. Being a kid who was denied the chance to grieve a parent's terminal illness because they thought it was what was best for me, is probably one of the things I will always be mad about. To be told, hey, your dad had a kidney removed because he had a really bad kidney infection. He's going to go recover in, at his second wife's house. And he's gonna be gone for the summer. He's fine though, he's good. Like, I'm at that point, I don't know much about cancer, I don't know what's going on, and I'm like, oh, okay, he's gonna be good. And meanwhile, I'm making out in this deal because he's gonna let me stay at his apartment. I don't know how no one had like red flags come up about this, but I guess that was the early 2000s. He just left some cash for me and the keys to the car and said, well, your friends can drive you to work. And if you need to get away, you can just stay here. So I did. And so the summer of being 15, kind of 16-ish, that range, I stayed at his place. I think it was 16. And he stayed at his now wife. By the way, they got married and didn't tell anyone. So I was denied any opportunity to be involved in that. It sucked. And I was like, wow, I am definitely not the priority in this world anymore. But it's cool. I can live on my own at 16. And I did, and I partied, and I don't know how the cops were never called or anything. And so there was all these like little attempts to get attention, and maybe that's why I was the bad influence. But nonetheless, I stayed relatively out of trouble. And when they came back from his recovery trip, I was told that there was not space for me anymore. And to tell a kid that you have bought a house that only has one bedroom and they will need to move back into the home that they have basically run from was step one of feeling fully abandoned. And I remember just going, really? Like, really? I got to move home? And so I packed up my stuff. I moved back in with my mom. I was working at that point. And I mean, it was maybe a couple weeks later that she picked me up from work, and she was so mad at me that she hauled off on the drive home and just clobbered me across the neck. And I mean, I was spitting up blood. My neck was bruised. It was just those moments of kind of explosive rage that came out. And I called a friend and I said, you got to come get me. I've got a laundry basket of clothes. And so they came pick me up. I went to her grandmother's, who was a nurse, and she's like, you need to go to the police. Like, this is not normal. And I walk into the police, I have visible bruises on my neck, and the police officer tells me, well, you need to go to the hospital and get a medical assessment or we can't file charges. And this is when that incident with my mom came back in, of her going to the hospital and my dad being livid. And I said, nope, not going to the hospital, not doing it. I'm not going to be the one who ends up on my dad's shit list because, here he is trying to quote unquote move on with his life, which wild that I did not, as his child, want to disrupt his life. Like, I just wanted him to be happy, and I thought he was happy. And so I said, okay, well, I guess I'm not going to file anything. Cool. Thanks for talking to me. CYF was never involved. So Children and Youth Families never got involved. And that wasn't, I know the cops showed up at our house at least one other time because my mom tried to report me as a runaway, and I was literally just hiding in the shed. and I snuck back into the house while the police were there, and they came upstairs and found me in my room and were like, she's right here. So like there were signs that things were not okay at home. And yet it was like up to me to figure out, well, how do I survive this? So now, and by the way, this is why this time frame is so embedded in my life, because it felt like just one domino after another after another. And I think the next fixated point of things was as I was bouncing and couch surfing around after this this incident where she punched me. And man, that woman was 5'4" and about 120 pounds, and she could inflict some damage when she was mad. But I bounced from couch to couch. I ended up with my friend Mark's family. And I just want to say, Edie and Jerry, if you were listening to this, you were angels at the time. Absolute, like, stand up lifesavers. They let me crash in the basement and just didn't ask questions. Mark's dad drove me to school in the morning. I think it went on for about a week, and then I got sick. And when I say I got sick, I could not get out of bed. I had a raging fever. And I remember his mom coming downstairs and going, honey, we don't have medical rights over you. Like, one of your parents has got to take you to the doctor. And people might think I'm blowing this up, but I promise I'm not. We're going to get there. So I think someone called my mom, and she picked me up and took me to the doctor. I was admitted, ironically, to my dad's hospital for a couple of days until I was actually eating something again. And then they sent me home, and then I don't remember the whole story because I obviously was not well, but I was refusing to swallow. I was like bleeding out of my nose and my mouth, and just whole like set of infections happening. And I was so dehydrated that like my skin was sticking together. So my pediatrician, I think, told my mom, you need to get her to Children's Hospital. And my mom's boyfriend, who they stayed together for years, up until his death a few years back, bless his heart, I hated him at the time. He did not like me. And here this man is trying to drive me into Pittsburgh. And he's this old school farmer from Western Pennsylvania. Like, I don't think he went into Pittsburgh if his life depended on it most times. But my mom was not driving at the time. And he was like, it's fine, I'll do it. Drove us in. He got lost on the way home, I found out later, and I felt really bad about that. But drove us to Children's Hospital. They were waiting for us when we got there because the physician had called, immediately took us back. I'm getting IVs pumped into me. I remember seeing a little girl in the ER, and no one was there with her. I think there was a social worker. I mean, this was a kid. I'm 16 at the time. This was like a 6-year-old. And ironically, I remember my mom like doing one of those comparison things and going, aren't you glad that's not you? And it's like, wow, I was at the time, but okay, well, what are you? Am I supposed to be really grateful that you're sitting here with me? And the doctor said, we can send her home. I had 4 IV bags given to me in the ER, and they were like, she's going to be right back here tomorrow. Like, we have no idea what's wrong with her. I tested negative for like everything across the board that would have been causing kind of everything that was going on. And so they admitted me, and yours truly was the first patient on the brand new floor of the Children's Hospital wing in Pittsburgh. And I became an episode of House for a few days. Every doctor coming around with their students, and they're poking and prodding and trying to figure out what's going on. And that first night, my mom left. And I was there, 16, super, super sick, no contacts, no glasses, can't see anything. Basically just non-functional. And she was tired. So she went to my aunt's to go to sleep. And I don't know if my dad was even aware yet at that point. I know the big incident happened the next day. But the person of that entire hospital stay, it's the reason I got into healthcare probably. There was a nurse on the floor, and she came in, and I'm pretty sure, looking back now, she was just trying to scare the living daylights out of me. But she pulled off of the wall over my bed all of the intubation items that they would use to intubate. And she said, if you don't start swallowing, you are going to stop breathing, because like everything was basically becoming completely raw in my throat. Like I said, it was just, I was a bloody mess. And she goes, you're probably going to have to be intubated overnight. Like, you're not going to heal the way that you're going right now. And something's going to have to happen. And she sat there and she held my hand and she like was just like, all right, now swallow. And it was the most painful thing. She pulled all the Kleenex out of my nose. I think I had Kleenex in my ears. Like, it was so, so horrible. And she stayed there with me as long as she could. She checked in constantly. And she was the one that got me through that night. I don't remember her name. I'm pretty sure she was a middle-aged blonde woman, but nonetheless, that was the human that cared for me more than anyone else in that whole kind of time frame. And it's wild to think about that. When my mom came back the next day, I remember calling my dad and my dad saying, well, I can't come in to see you. And she, being his wife, doesn't want me around your mom. I'm sorry, sir. I'm your daughter and I'm really sick and they don't know what's wrong with me and I might have to be intubated and you're not allowed to come in. Now, keep in mind, there are no restraining orders in place. There is nothing crazy like that happening. Nothing. And he never did come to see me while I was staying at that children's hospital. And that's when I think everything changed for me. And I felt like, I'm alone now. I'm alone in this. And I kind of floated through things for the next kind of couple years as everything just continued to play out. Spoiler, I had a severe strain of Epstein-Barr, which is what causes mono, that had gone undetected. The strain actually wasn't showing up on a lot of the tests, so they had to run like these extra whatever lab tests to find out that's what I had. And then on top of that, I inquired all these other infections because my immune system was basically shot. And I've never really fully recovered. I have chronic fatigue syndrome, and get into that in a later thing that I battle continuously. I missed half a year of school from that episode and then a kind of a relapse that I had later in the year. And so now I'm trapped at home with my mother, who is mentally unwell. I'm not allowed to, I can't see my dad because he's not allowed around my mom. And I'm so sick, I can't really leave or do anything. And it sucked. And it all kind of led up to, I think, being really, really fragile and really not knowing who you could trust anymore and who would ever be around for you. And there were moments, I think, where my dad's, guilt shone through. I remember went to the high school. My friend Mark, who I had stayed with, he went to that high school that Mark went to and bribed them basically to let Mark register for the prom late, and told them, he goes, I'm not going to be around for her senior prom. She's a junior over at the competing school. Can her and her friend who go here go to the prom? And so we were like the last person in the Grand March. If you're in Pennsylvania, you know the Grand March style. And it was a wonderful time. And, he got to see me, do that. But it was a rare kind of instance that happened. And so everything's devolving at that point. And I think it's really probably one of the last things I remember saying to my dad before he got really, really sick. I was having a meltdown at home. My mom didn't know what to do with me. She obviously wasn't all there. And she called my dad in one of those rare instances that he actually picked up the phone and just said, "You talk to her." And I remember sitting in my room and my dad's doing his usual. He always said this stuff about, remember two things. It's all my fault and I love you. And he was trying, I think, to go down that, what I consider a very toxic parental route of trying to take all the blame off of things and just kept saying, well, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. And I screamed at him on the phone and I said, "You're dying. How can you say everything's going to be okay? You are dying." And it was probably the first time that he was confronted with that by someone he loved. That I don't know if it was a feeling of kind of giving up or what, but this idea of no, you are you're going to be gone. And he hung up the phone on me. And I don't think we had a lot of conversations after that. He kind of declined really quickly that fall, where I was 17, so the fall of 2002, and through winter, and then passed away ultimately in February of 2003. And I don't remember having a chance to have a conversation with him that wasn't monitored after that. There was always someone present. We weren't allowed to upset him. You weren't allowed to really say anything that would get him worked up or anything like that. And so at that point, I feel like I'd completely lost my dad. My mom was now in this new relationship and couldn't have time for anything. Never did like college visits. I just picked a college and went there and continued to just do what I had to do. And looking back, there's part of me that was like, wow, you should have probably had a full meltdown. Full meltdown. And, we've talked about it before about the teacher that stepped in and kind of was one of those stable voices in life. But if there's a theme that I see through this, it's in those times of extreme stress and extreme kind of fear. It's the people that you might least expect. It's the teacher, it's the friend's parents, it's, other individuals that aren't responsible for you necessarily. Like my parents wanted to have me, and that's where I ended up in those few years, was just kind of lost within all of the drama that they were going through. And I will always believe at the end that there was a component of my dad that kind of saw things for what they were. I saw him a couple days before he died. I was told what I could and couldn't say to him. And at that point, I had been assaulted. I knew that I was pregnant. I did not know what I was going to do with that pregnancy. And I was told not to upset him. Do not upset him. Like, he can't talk. We don't know how much he can hear. Just tell him that you love him and it's okay for him to go. And it wasn't okay for him to go in my book. Never was, even though I was the one that told him he was dying months earlier. And he looked at me, and I remember him just kind of, your parents, the people that you love. And he knew there was something. And I miscarried later the day that he died. And I will always think that it was kind of his last, I'm going to save you. I'm going to be here and I'm going to take this away and make sure that you don't have to make that decision in some, weird final attempt at things. And maybe that's just how I justify it. But all of that, and I never learned how to trust someone to always be there, that there wouldn't be something else that would come up that would make it so that they just kind of forget about you. And so I think that it's something, and one of the reasons why I have so loved building a career that I have, because I have created this separate human in my professional life that doesn't rely on people in the way that I think personally you would want to rely on someone to always be there. I expect in the professional world it's going to be a little cutthroat. People are out for themselves. They're doing what they want to do. They owe you nothing. And so to flip into that mode and to be like, yeah, bring it on. You cannot be more toxic to me than what I've already been through in life, made me kind of the person that I was, and probably one of the reasons why I was able to promote in the way that I did, and I don't know, just be kind of the person that I was in leadership and management roles. And then I look back and I think about the fact that my dad was in his late 40s when all of this happened. And I'm like, well, I'm 40 and I still have really bad days. And I can't even imagine having a kid or a crazy ex-wife or anything else really happening. And, the same, I think, for some of the things that my mom was going through. But it's also, it makes me sad, I think, that there's not a way for me to ever truly get closure. And I think that's what a lot of people struggle with, especially when we're looking at death or trauma around loved ones. And, never being able to get the answer, not being able to say, well, why didn't you come to the hospital? Like, what was wrong? And it wasn't just that instance. I had been in a car wreck at 16 in Pittsburgh, and same kind of thing. Well, I can't come to the hospital. Your stepmother won't be happy with that. She doesn't want me around your mom. And it's like, my God, aren't we all adults in this scenario? And I think I catch myself saying that all of the time now. Can't we just be adults? Can't we just grow up? Can't we just be professionals about this whole thing? And I think it's because that's the message that I wanted to give my dad. It's the message I wanted to give my mom. Can't you guys just grow up? Here I am. I'm a teenager and I'm acting more grown up than you. But nonetheless, I was challenged today by Josh to try and think about the good things that I became, the good person that I became, despite or because of all of those lessons learned. And I think I'm going to get into this with a guest in the near future about different ways to look at gratitude. And it's not about counting your blessings, it's about understanding that where you are and who you are, even on days where I may quote unquote hate myself a little bit, I still wouldn't want to be different. And yes, I'd like to be skinnier. Yes, I'd like to be more mentally stable a lot of the times. But I can't imagine being anyone else other than who I am. And so I think giving myself, and hopefully anyone listening to this can give themselves permission to understand the feelings and the hurt and the pain and the sadness that maybe you didn't grant yourself at the time, years and years ago. Just let yourself be sad for that now. Like, let yourself be like, that was fucked up. Like, really fucked up. And it's okay to say that and to be mad about it for a little bit. And to also understand that if in this moment you appreciate who you are, it doesn't mean you have to be happy that stuff happened to you. But I think you can present yourself a token of thanks for deciphering it in a way that has made you a person that functions to this day. And even if it's not the way that you want to function, even if it's not to the highest of standards, it is still a beautifully broken process that got us here. And I will never believe that anything that happened was okay, or any trauma that folks have gone through is something that's like, oh yeah, good, glad you were really hurt. And I won't ever tell anyone what was the silver lining, what was the good thing that came of that. Everything happens for a reason, kind of thing. But I do think that when we embrace understanding the cracks that exist in us that we have mended, it lets us help other people mend their cracks too, either directly or indirectly. And that's why I want to talk about these things. That's why I want to get into these difficult conversations. That's why I am, venturing into the past in a way that honestly is really hard for me sometimes to, come back down from over the course of a couple days after recording. But it matters. We can't ignore it. We can't learn from it if we just simply write it off as it is what it was. But we also, I think, can decide to own our story and to write the future in a way that breaks the cycle. And whatever that might look like for anyone, I think is important. And for me, it's that when someone expresses to me that they feel like they have not been a priority, that I don't turn it into a me thing, because that's what it always happened. I was like, well, you don't understand what I'm going through or what I'm doing. And so when a friend says, feels like you just don't care anymore, instead of coming back with the excuses saying, well, what can I do? Like, how do I make this better? Like, our lives have changed. We're not the same people we were. Like, how do we exist in this new kind of normal? And that's what I can promise. That's the lesson I kind of take out of this, is that I want to make sure that I can be responsive and understand that I can't make everyone a priority. I'm my own priority right now. And I can make space for other people that might need it. And I'm going to make space for those people that need it. But everything can't be on fire all at once. And you have to have those open lines of communication to understand that. And really, I think asking the hard questions and trying to figure out what are all the ways that I can support someone without maybe physically being there. Okay, if I can't come and be present with you, well, what else can I do? So I have no idea where this all like wound from. Honestly, I may not listen to this episode for a few days, just in order to kind of let myself decompress from the whole thing. But it is, I think, an opportunity for me to understand those moments that I thought were so tragic in a way. That day that I called my dad and I said, "You are dying." If anything, I wish I could have said it earlier so that he and I could have navigated the grief of the loss while he was still here, instead of it being at a point where it's a little too late. And when I look back and I think about that nurse who sat by my side, understanding the power that someone who you may never even remember their name can have on you. And so if that's you, if you're that nurse, knowing that, you know, how many lives may have you impacted without even realizing it? How many people may have you have stabilized for that moment in time to let them get to the next lesson or let them get to the next experience? And I think in the end, it's just understanding that we are all survivors of something, all of us. And whether or not we show that outwardly, whether or not that exhibits itself in what, you know, people now call crash, or what I will always and forever call a spiral, it doesn't mean it's not happening. It's just like invisible illness. Trauma is also very invisible at times. And it may or may not be something that we can pick up on easily. So having that space for yourself, having that space for those around you, to take those steps, and then to have the open conversations about being a priority, picking people. How do I not make you feel abandoned? When do I feel abandoned? Have I told you that makes me feel like you don't care? If we don't talk about it, we'll never know. We haven't figured out how to mind read yet. And we can only do what we can do. So, with that, it's a glance into the hot mess that has created, I think, a little bit of my high potential. And I look forward to hearing from folks about what are some of your hot messes that you've been afraid to look at or afraid to get into. What can you take from it? Do you want to take anything from it? And by the way, if you just want to lock that chest and stick it in the closet, that's okay too. Trauma and healing and grief and all of that are unique journeys. We're all on our own one. And I just want to say thank you for being here through another episode. Motivation in that. Come back next Sunday. We'll get into a little more. Bye, guys.